Welcome back to another Python lecture. In this lecture, we are going to learn about very important thing. The topic is file handling. So far, we have worked with various explains the list of module and packages. There is one important question. How can we manage to the data generated by a Python program? So, for example, suppose we have a student's name, marks, or some other information that we want to save in of the program is used. This is where file handling becomes useful. File handling allows us to work with files directly through our Python program. We can create, open, read, write, modify, and close files. So in this lecture, we will understand these concepts step by step with simple examples and practical program. So now let's move on to our next slide and we see a small recap of our previous lecture. So moving on to our next slide. Before we start with this topic, let's quickly recap what we learned in lecture 12. In our previous lecture, we learned about modules, packages in Python, and how they help us organize and in our code. First, we learned about modules. Module is simply a Python file with a .py extension that contains Python code. It can contain functions, classes, and variables that we can use in other programs. Next, we learn about packages. A package is a collection or related module organized inside the directory. Packages help us manage larger Python projects in a structured way. Then we learn how to import modules. We can use the import statement to import an entire module. We can also use from import when we only need a specific function or variable from a module. After that, we discussed built-in modules. Python provides many useful modules that are already available to us, such as math, random, datetime, OS, and SYS. These modules provide ready-to-use functionality which saves us time and effort. We also learn how to create our own module. So, we can create a Python file containing our own function or classes and then import the file into another program. This allows us to reuse our code instead of writing the same code again and again. Finally, we learn about the module search command. When we import a module, Python searches for that module in a specific directories. These locations are available through sys.path. The search path can include the current directory, standard library directory, and install packages. So, the main takeaway from lecture 12 is the modules and packages help us write modular, usable, and organized Python program. So now that we have quickly revised the previous lecture, let's move to our today's topic, file handling in Python. So moving on to our next slide. Now let's understand what exactly file handling means in Python. So file handling is the process of creating, reading, writing, updating, or deleting files using a Python program. So instead of keeping all our data only inside the program, we can store the data in a file and access it whenever we need it. Now you may wonder, why do we need file handling? So when a Python program is running, the data we create is usually stored in temporarily in memory. Once the program stops, the data can be lost. For example, suppose we are creating a program that stores the marks of students. So if we only store those marks in variables and then close the program, we may lose that information. Now, with file handling, we can save the data in a file so it remains available even after as we stop. So file handling is also very useful when we are working with large amount of data. So there are several benefits of using file handling. As you can see, there are some benefits. So the first is data persistence. The data remains stored even after the program finishes. Second one is reusability. Once data is stored in a file, we can read and use it again whenever required. Third is efficiency. File allows us to manage and work with large amount of data more easily. And another benefit is sharing. Files can be shared with other users or applications. And finally, file handling help us keep our data organized and structured. Now let's look at some real life examples. So we can store user preference in text or configuration files. Student records can be stored using CSV or text file. Application can maintain in log files to record important event or activities. And web application can store structural information using format JSON. Here it is written JSON. So file handling is not just about reading and writing text. It is an important part of building practical application that need to store and manage data. The key takeaway is that file handling allow our Python program to work with data that can be stored permanently, making our application more useful and reliable. So now that we understand that what file handling is and why it is important, let's move to our next step, opening and reading files in Python. So thank you and moving on to our next. Now let's understand how can we open or read files in Python. So to work with a file, the first thing we need to do is open that file. For this, Python provides the open function. You can see here the open function clearly. This is the open function provided by the Python to open a file. So the basic syntax for this is, you can see here, file is equal to open, then in bracket file name, comma, mode, and it is not necessary. So here the first argument is the file name, and the second argument is specify what we want to do with the file, this mode. So let's look at some commonly used file modes. The R mode, it stands for read. It is the default mode and is used when we want to read an existing file. You can see. Then the W mode, write mode. It allows us to write the data into a file. If the file already exists, its previous content will be replaced. Similarly, the A mode, it is stands for the append mode. It allows us to add new content to end of an existing file. And finally, X stands for creating new file. It creates a new file, but if the file already exists, Python will give an error. So we can also specify the encoding of the file. You can see here, I told you it is not necessary for you. So using UTF-8 encoding is useful when our file may contain different type of character. So now let's see how can we read the contents of a file. The first method is read. The read method reads the entire content of the file and returns it as a single string. For example, you can see here, example here, f is equal to open sample.txt and r content is equal to f dot read, print content and f dot close. So if our file contains hello Python and welcome to file handling. This you can see here, this is our file, and so both line will be displayed. The second method is read line. So as the name suggests, read line, it reads only one line at a time from the file. So here you can see that only one line is written, which is hello Python. The third method is read lines. So it is similar as read line, but it read all the lines instead of single line from the file and return them as a list of strings. Now remember, read reads the entire file, read line read on one line, and read lines read all line and returns a list. And one important point after finishing our work with file, we should close it with close. So in modern Python, we can use the with open statement, which automatically handles closing the file. We will use this approach in our practical programs. So now we know how to open a file and read its content. Next, let's move on to our next topic, which is about appending file. So next topic is about writing and appending file and closing the file. So moving for next topic, hope you will understand this topic. So now that we know about how to open and read files, let's learn how to write data into a file. How can we append a new data in a file and how we can properly close a file. So first let's talk about the write method. This one, the write method. So for writing, we generally use the W mode. The W mode opens a file for writing. If the file already exists, its previous content is overwritten. If the file does not exist, Python will create a new file. For example, you can see here, read the code first. So here we are opening data.txt in write mode and writing two lines into it. You can see with open we are opening the data.txt file, then we are writing two lines in that file. So now what if we don't know what to delete the existing content? That's where the append comes in. We use the A mode for appending. Append modes add new content to the end of the existing file without removing the previous data. For example, you can see here we are opening again the data.txt file and we are appending two lines. We are appending two lines. These lines will be added at the last of the file and nothing will remove from the file. The new lines will be added after the existing content. So remember the main difference. W mode writes new content and overrides existing content. A mode adds new content without deleting existing content. So now let's talk about closing files. When we manually open a file using open, we should close it after finishing our work. We can use the close method. You can see here the example. The close method closes the file and releases the resources by it. But there is an easier and safer way to handle file using with open statement. For example, you can see with open sample.txtw as if in here Python automatically closes the file when the with block finishes. This is the recommended way to work with files because we don't have to remember to call close manually. So closing file is important because it helps ensure the data is properly saved, releases system resources and reduces the chance of file related problems. So the key point from this slides is write is used to write data, W mode overrides existing content, A mode appends the content to the end of a file, close manually closes a file, and with open automatically handles closing file and is the recommended approach. With open, this whole is a function with open. It automatically handles closing the file and is recommended approach. So with this, we know the basic operation of opening, reading, writing, appending, and closing of files. So this is clear to you. So moving on to our next slide. Now let's understand different file mode that we can use with Python's open function. So file modes tell Python what operation we want to perform on a file. There are 5 important modes shown here: read, write, append, create, and binary modes. So the first mode is read mode. You can see R mode, which stands for read. It opens an existing file for reading. The file must already exist and the file pointer starts from the beginning. For example, you can see there, you can write like this: open file.txt file is opening, then R. So we can use f.read to read its content. Now next is W, which stands for write mode. It opens a file for writing. If the file does not exist, Python creates it. But there is one important thing to remember. If the file already exists, its existing content will be deleted, erased. For example, you can see here First we have to open the file. Here examples are given. You can see here the example. If it's equal to open data.txt file is opening, then we are okay, sorry, sir. Then we are using W to write the file. Then we are writing hello in the file. Now the third mode is append. It opens the file for adding new content. Unlike write mode, it does not erase the existing content. Instead, new content is added to the file. You can see the syntax down there. Now, the fourth mode is X. It is used to create a new file. It creates the file only if it does not already exist. If you can see here file.txt, then opening the file and creating it. If this file.txt already exists, Python will raise an file exist error. This mode is useful when we especially want to make sure a new file is created. Second is binary mode. It is denoted by RB and WB. We use RB for reading binary files and WB for writing binary files. So binary mode is useful. Files such as file for images, videos, audios, and another non-text data. For example, you can see open image.png RB, open image.png WB. So first here image is opened in binary read mode, and here it opens the file for writing binary data. So let's quickly remember all the modes. R for read, W for write and overwrite, A for append, X for creating new file, RB for reading binary file, WB for writing binary file. So all the examples I told you are given here. So one important tip after working with a file, always close it using f.close, or prefer use with open, which closes the file automatically. So understanding which mode is important because choosing the wrong mode can either prevent operation or in case of W accidentally erase the all data. So hope this is clear to you. Now moving on to our next slide. Now let's learn about exception handling with files. So while working with files, different errors can occur. For example, we may try to open a file that does not exist. To handle this error properly and prevent our program from crashing, we use exception handling. So the first keyword is the try keyword. The try block contains the code that might cause an error. For example, you can see here the example. Here we are trying to open and read a file. So f is equal to open myfile.txt, and here we are reading a file. You can see r data f.read print, and then we are closing the file. So second, now the next is except block. The except block runs when an exception occurs inside the try block. For example, assume this block does not run, an exception occurs. So instead of crashing the program, Python executes the except block and displays the proper error message. Now the third one is file not found error. It is a specific Python exception. It occurs when we try to open a file for reading, but that file does not exist at the specified location. For example, if you are writing opening a text and you are reading it, the file does not exist, the Python will give a file not found error. Simply, if you want to open a file that is not present in the Python, it will give a file not found error. Now, handling over exception. We can also handle other type of exception. For example, you can see here the example. Here the first except handles a file not found error. You can see the first except block handles a file not found. The second except handles handles other unexpected exception. The as e part stores the error in the variable e. which we can print to understand what went wrong. Now you can see the other example. The recommended way of working with file is to use with open. So the advantage here is that Python automatically closes the file after the with block finishes. This with block, you don't need to use the close statement here, the f dot close. So why we use exception handling? There are several benefits of exception handling. First, it prevents the program from crashing unexpectedly. Second, it allows us to display meaningful error message instead of confusing technical errors. And finally, it helps us create more robust and user-friendly program. So whenever you are working with file, especially when opening or reading file, it's good practice to handle possible exceptions. Remember, try contains code that may cause an error and except handles the error. File not found error occurs when the required data does not exist. And whenever possible, use with open or safe file handling. That's how exception handling help us work with files safely and prevent unexpected program crashes. So this is all the slide. If you not understand anything, you can go back and rewatch the lecture. So moving on to our next slide. Now let's learn about working with text files in Python. Text files are files that store data in human readable format. Using characters, they are commonly used for things like notes, logs, configuration files, and simple data storage. So first let's see how we can read text from a file. Python provides three commonly used methods which we talked previous. The first one is read, that reads the entire file. Readline, read one line at a time, and readlines, reads one line and return them as a list. And you can see the example given here. I already told you about all these three methods. You can see here reads the complete content of the file and stores in the variable data here. And here in this block of code, uh, f dot readline. So it is only reading only one line of the file, and we want all the lines as a list. We can use read lines. So remember, read is used to read entire file, read line is used to read one line from the file, and read lines use all the lines of the list. Now let's see how to write a text data into a file. So we can use the W mode with, you can see this code. Here the W mode opens the file for writing. You can see the file is open for writing. If the file already exists, its previous content will be overwritten. If we want to add new content without removing the existing content, we use append mode or A. For example, you can see here the append mode with open output of text and A. Append mode is used. So the new content will be added to the end of the file. So the main difference is W used to overwrite existing content and append adds content to the end. Now we can also save different type of information as inside a text file. For example, suppose we have a student's name, age and course. See the code here. So this will create an info.txt file containing the student's information in a readable format. Notice that we use f strings to insert the values of variables into the text. You can see here f strings are used. Now finally let's look at some important best practices of working with text files. These are some best practices. Let's understand this. First, before using with open, it automatically closes the file after we finished working it. Use, it's not use with open, use with open. This is whole keyword with and open. Use this, use with open. Second, always choose the correct file mode. Use R for reading, W for writing, and A for appending the file. Third, use try except when there is a possibility of error, such as trying to open a file that does not exist. If you are not using with open, remember manually close the file using close. And finally, keep your file organized and use meaningful file names so that your project remains easy to understand. Now, text files are simple and useful for storing human readable information. We can read data using read, readline, and readlines. We can write data using W mode and append data using A mode. And by following proper file handling practices, we can make our Python programs safer, cleaner, and easier to maintain. So, hope this is clear to you. Now, moving on to our next slide, hope all the topics are clear to you. And if you are facing problem in any topic, you can comment down or you can go back and watch the lecture from starting or where you are facing the problem. So moving on to our next slide. Thanks. Now let's look at a real life example of file handling by creating a simple student record file. Suppose we want to store the name of a student along with their marks in a text file and then read and display those records. So first we will create a file called student.txt. You can see here we are creating a file student.txt. We use with open file with W mode because we want to write the student record into the file. So here the first write statement stores Rahul's name and marks. This will store Rahul's name and marks. You can see the \n moves the cursor to the next line. This \n will move the cursor to the next line as you can see here in the output. The second writes the statement stores Anita name and marks. Then you can see this will store Anita name and marks. And then again \n which will move to the next line. So after running this code, you can see the output here. Now we want to read and display these records. For that we open the same file using R mode. You can see the same file is used, but this time here R mode is used. So the read method reads the complete content of the file and the print displays it on the screen. So our output will be Rahul 90 marks and Anita 95 marks. This is a simple example, but the same concept can be used in real application to store a student record, employee information, logs, notes, and other data. Now let's practice a small program. So the task is to write some text into a file named demo.txt. We can do this using, you can see here with open. That's right. When this code runs, Python creates demo.txt. If it does not already exist and write welcome to Python into it. Now let's read the content of the demo.txt in the second example. So we use R mode here. You can see the R mode is used while opening the file and the output will come welcome to Python. So this example demonstrates the complete basic process. Create or open a file, then write data, then read data, then display the data. And because we are using with open, Python automatically handles closing the file. So text file provides a simple way to store information permanently. In this example, we stored the student names and marks and then read those records back from the file. With this basic concept, we can start building more useful files-based Python program. So now, I hope the lecture is clear to you. And moving on to our next slide, all the topics are cleared off in the lecture. So the next slide is the quiz slide. Then we will conclude our lecture after that slide. So moving on to our next slide. So now it's time to test what we learned about file handling in this lecture in Python. Now take a moment to think about each question before checking the answer. After each question, you can pause the video. and you can give your answer. So the question number one, which function is used to open a file in Python? Think about it. Mm, The correct option is open. The open function is used to open a file for reading, writing, and appending or other operations. Now, coming to our second question, which mode is used to open a file for reading? The correct option is W, R, A, or X. So the correct option is R. The R mode opens an existing file for reading. Now, what happens if we open a file in W mode and the file already exists? Read the options. So the correct answer is the existing content is deleted. Option number C. The W mode overrides the existing content of the file, so always be careful when using write mode. Now our fourth question, which method reads the entire content of a file? The entire content. Think about it. The correct option is read. The question number 5, which method reads a single line from the file? The correct option is the correct option is read line. Now moving on to our next question. Which mode is used to append the data to a file? This is very simple. I hope you all have answered. The correct option is answer A. The correct option is C, A. Which statement is used to close a file? So it is also very simple. File.close. It manually closes the file after we finish working with it. However, when using with open, Python automatically closes the file for us. Now, the last question, which mode is used to create a new file? It raises an error if the file already exists. Correct option is option D, X mode. The X mode creates a new file, but if a file with the same name already exists, Python raises a file exists error. Now, before we finish, let's quickly remember the important concept that open opens a file, read, you start the write and overwrite, they append, and X creates a new file. Read is used to read the entire file. Readline reads only one line. Close closes the file. Now, great work. Keep practicing. And in the next slide, we will conclude this lecture. So I hope you have solved all the problems. All the problems are easy. So moving on to our next slide, and we will conclude this lecture. All right, everyone. That brings us to the end of lecture 13, file handling in Python. In this lecture, we learn how Python allows us to work with files and store data permanently. We started by understanding what a file handling is and why it is important. Then we learned how to open files using the open function and explore different file modes such as read, write, append, and create. After that, we learned how to read data from file using methods like read, readline, or readlines. We also learned how to write and append data to files and why it is important to close file properly. Then we explored different file modes in more detail, including binary file handling, and learned how to use exception handling with file to manage errors such as file not found error. Finally, we worked with text file and solved some practical example, including creating and reading a student record file. I hope this lecture helped you understand the basic of file handling and how Python can be used to store, read, and manage real world data efficiently. Now it's your turn to practice. Try creating your own text files, write some data into them, read the data back and experiment with different file modes. The more you will practice, the more confident you will become in Python. If you found this lecture helpful, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the upcoming Python lecture. And if I made any mistake while explaining a concept or writing the code, I sincerely apologize. I'm not a professional content creator. Please let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to correct it. So thank you so much for watching. Keep practicing, keep learning, and I'll see you in our next Python lecture. So